So, you know, if they're having any trouble, and if you're absolutely having trouble and you can't figure it out, I'll be happy to go over it again, or if I absolutely need to, I'm happy to show you after class. It's a little bit difficult to navigate the aisles with backpacks and stuff, so just kind of keep that in mind. Of course, office hour is going to be 10 a.m. until noon in 50, just right down the hall from here. So it's the IS lab, so very excited to have that. Any questions before we get started? I see a couple people using the preview in Canvas. I highly recommend you download it and use the Excel. Canvas preview might let you view it, but in terms of actually editing it and doing stuff, you'll be a lot better off using the actual version of Excel. Apart from that, I recommend that you take notes over anything you don't know. Take notes however you like. If you have a notebook, that's fine. You know, laptop, anything you want to use to take notes on, I recommend it. Because, you know, on the exam, it's closed book, closed notes. So if you took notes, hypothetically, you'd probably have learned it better. You won't be able to use them on the exam, though. So give you guys just a couple seconds to get ready. So is everyone getting the Excel file pulled up? All right, looks like most people are ready. So this might be a review for some of you, but you may learn some new stuff. Either way, the purpose of this class is to really ensure that all the business students that leave Fort Lewis College are able to do basic data analysis. So you'll take Ivan eventually. He's a great guy. He's going to teach you a lot in R, do a lot of great things. Like I said, this class is really all about making sure that you can use Microsoft Excel to a reasonable level, and also that you can understand relational data models. You can, you know, make basic tables. You can manipulate data within inside of a database. That's what this class is all about. So it's going to start off kind of basic. We'll get a little bit more involved as we go. So we'll just start off with the different functions and operators. So right here, we have a minus sign. Any guesses for what that does? Subtracts, of course. So if we were to do this, there's a couple different ways we could do this. So in general, you always want to make sure that you start off an equation in Excel with the equal sign. Now, there's other ways you can start off an equation. For example, you can start it with a plus sign. I just think the equal sign is a better way to do it personally. So put equals. And then let's say someone throw me a number. 37. Someone throw me another number. 12. Okay, so we take 37 minus 12, hit enter, gives us 25. Pretty basic stuff right there. Next, we have the parentheses. Everyone see the parentheses next? Can everyone see this relatively okay? I can make it just a hair larger if we need to. Well, I'm inside of an equation once I'm not. So it's a little bit larger. All right, so we have the parentheses. So think back to your basic algebra classes you had in high school. Maybe you had them here. Don't really know, but you probably had order of operations at some point. Is that fair to say? So in general, we have the please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Okay, what is the P? Parentheses. So the parentheses are the first things we're going to do inside of an equation. So let's just see an example here. If I were to type in, let's do that 37 minus 12, if I can type 37. And when we do that, that's going to always do it. Now, let's say we wanted to do a different operator as well. Let's say we want to multiply that by 2. Okay, so as it is right now, what is the first part of this that's going to be computed? 12 times 2. So that's going to take 37 minus 24. Is that correct? Let's see. So it does. Now, what if we wanted to change the order? What if we want to do 37 minus 12 first? Well, all we have to do is put that inside of parentheses. Okay, now it's going to do that first. So that gives us 50. Is that clear? Okay. So, these can get nested and do all kinds of other cool stuff, but for now, it's going to keep it simple. Understand the basic function operator. We'll get more advanced as we go. Okay? So now we've got the asterisk. Of course, the asterisk multiplies. So we can take two numbers. Let's take 2, multiply it by 5. What's that going to give us? We've got some smart people in here, don't we? It does, in fact, give us 10. Okay? So now we have divide. We can do the same thing. We'll take, let's do 5 divided by 2. Okay, it gives us 2.5. So, we're going to take any numbers we want to there, divide them. I got the addition down here. Hopefully you all know what the plus sign does. So, someone throw me a number. 126, another number. 21. Let's do one more for fun. Just one more number. 2. Okay. So we're going to take 3 things here, add them together, gives us 149. Okay. We could add as many things as we wanted inside of this equation. That's the cool thing about Excel. Okay. So those are basic operators, and by now you're probably thinking, well, this is an easy class. Well, it gets a little bit more complicated even just today. So we have, in statistics, we have the mean, median, and mode. Who can tell me what the mean is? Okay, what's the mean? Exactly, so the average of whatever we're averaging. Who can tell me what the mode is? It is the most occurring number. What about the median? It's the middle number, exactly. So we can do all those things in Excel. I'll make a note that instead of calling it mean, it's called average. So if we want to take the average of something, we're going to start it off like this. Use the equal sign, type in average. Now you can tell that it's kind of got some different suggestions here. If we want to be lazy, we could tab over, and it'll go ahead and start it off. Now within this, we always type the function name. So type function name. And then we always open and close parentheses. Whatever we put inside of this parentheses is going to have the function applied to it. Does that make sense? Okay. So now we can average multiple numbers. So someone throw me a number. 10. Okay. Now we separate these out by a comma. So we do 10. What's another number? How about 20? Anyone like 20 in here? It's a college. A lot of you probably like 21. Does that sound good? So let's average one more. 3 is no fun to average. 4 is a much better number to average. Another number. 5. Okay. So now, of course, we close the parentheses off, hit enter, gives us 14 for the average. Now, with these functions, we don't have to be limited to typing in each number manually. We could use a range of numbers. So if you'll see here on the left, or the right of the screen rather, we have months, sample data. What we could actually do here is, instead of just typing in numbers manually, we can do this a couple different ways. We can just click and then drag down and get a range that way. So certainly one way we could do it. We don't have to do it where we click and drag, okay? We can manually type the cell we begin in, separate it out with a colon, and then type the cell we want to end the range in. Now, another way we could do this, it might be a little bit easier. We can just click the F column. Okay, so just click in the top where it says F right here. Hit enter. You can tell that gives us 4.90 repeating. Okay, now if we were to do the range manually, I'll show you. It's going to give us the same thing because it's only going to use the numeric values. Okay, so it's the exact same result either way. It could be a little bit quicker to do that. And what's another advantage of using the entire column? So let's say we added data later. Do we want to go through and see everywhere that we use the F column and expand it manually? Or would it just be better to have the whole F column go on ahead and have in the formula? So there's advantages to each, certainly, but most of the time we're just going to use the whole F column. So it's going to be F colon F. Does that make sense for the range? Okay. Now, I'll go ahead and skip around a little bit here. We'll come back to the ifs. But for now, what about the count? Anyone want to take a guess at what the count does? Anyone ever watch Sesame Street as a kid? What did the count do? Count Von Count. Counted, exactly. So I'm not going to do the after every count, but imagine that we were to. So we're just going to type in equals count, and just going to put in the values we want to count. So let's say I want to count the F column. Can we do that? Let's see. We can. What's another way we could count things? Well, there's a lot of different ways, but we can basically just select the range, or we could select the values. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that, show you guys. Gives us the same thing. It's only going to count numeric values if there are numeric values inside the column. Is that clear? Okay. Sum. So sum, of course, is going to add different values together. So like we did with the plus sign, this is doing the same thing. Only, so imagine we had a big list of values. We want to add them all together for some reason. We can use sum to do that. So all we have to do is just type equals sum, tab over, and then just say what we want to add. So let's add the F column. Let's do that. It gives us 54. Now another way we could use sum, of course, instead of just typing in the entire column, would be to type in the first value, and this is using a relative reference. We'll get to that in a little bit. Second value. We can even mix it up and put in the actual number next. 3, 4. So you see, there's lots of different ways we can use these, okay? Not just limited to one particular way. Sum product. So sum product is an interesting sort of function in that it does two things. It takes the sum of the products. So you have a vector and a vector. It's going to multiply them together, take the sum of each of those. So for example, let's say that we wanted to multiply 1 times 1, 2 times 1, 3 times 1, 4 times 1. Instead of doing that manually, all we have to do is use the sum vector, or sum product, I mean. So we just type in sum product, and now we can multiply an entire array by another array. So that's a really cool function. Okay, so what this did is it took 1 times 1, and it added it up all the way down. So 8 times 4, added that to 7 times 3, and so on and so forth. Does that make sense? Yeah, sure. So for sum product, you just started off with the function name, which is a sum product, S-U-M-P-R-O-D-U-C-T. And a lot of times I like to tab over once you kind of get it at the first one. So you just type in sum, you know, it's going to give you sum, but if you type in sum P, it only gives you sum product. So you can just use the tab key and get straight to where you can start the function. So now we're just going to multiply the first array. So every value in this is going to get multiplied by the value to the right of it. So we're going to put that first array in, use our good friend the comma, and then put in the second array. Okay? So then we just hit enter, and it gives us the answer. So feel free to stop me if I go too fast. I like to get excited. I don't like to go fast, but I have a tendency to go fast. So you know, if I need to explain something again, certainly let me know. Okay. So now we've kind of covered some basic functions here, but we're not quite done yet. We also want to talk about Vlookup a little bit. So Vlookup is an interesting sort of function in that what we're really doing is we're looking up a particular value. So within Vlookup, we first tell it what value we want to give it. So if we wanted to look up, say, 5, and we told it where to look inside of the table. And then after that, we say, which value within the table do we want to give it? And then lastly, you almost always are going to use false as the last modifier. The reason is if you don't, it'll approximate it. And if you're looking for an exact value, you're going to want to make sure that you say false. It's only going to give you the exact value there. Does that make sense? So let's see it in action. Okay. So we come down here to Vlookup. So we start off with Vlookup. And now, first going to tell it what value we want to look for. So which value of these, let's say a value that doesn't repeat. So it can either be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, or 8. Any preferences for any of those? 8. Okay, so that's going to be the lookup value. Now we tell it where to look. Now in this case, it's always going to look for that value in the first column. Okay, so, but if we wanted to get a value that wasn't that, but it was beside that, and that's what we're going to do in this case, we go ahead and select 2 columns. Okay, so we're looking for the value 8, but we want to get the second value within inside of that range. So what we're going to do is we're going to see 8, okay, and then which column are we interested in? So we're interested in the G column in this case because if we're looking for 8, we already know the value is 8. So we want to look for something else. Does that make sense? So think about this in a different term. Imagine you had a list of people's grades. And each person has, what do they call it here? 900 number? Is that what it's called? Some sort of student ID. And you want to see what your grade was. So imagine you were putting in your student ID as the lookup value. But you're not interested in what your student ID is. You know that. So instead, you would select the range that has the entire grade, and whichever column the grade itself is that you're interested in, that is what you're going to put for the column. So in this case, we're going 1 column over. So the first column will be 1. In this case, we're using the second column. So we're going to put a 2 there. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so we're putting a 2 there. And again, we want to make sure that we use the exact match, which is going to be false. If you put in true, you can use an approximate match. Okay, so that's all we're doing for now. And of course, that gives us 4. Now, we could have a lot more columns and find a lot more data than just using that. One of the things, a couple notes, and this is probably good notes to write down as well, with Vlookup, has to be a unique value. If there were repeating value, it would cause problems. Why would it cause problems? Because one cell has one value. And if it's finding multiple things that meet the criteria, it's just going to give you one of them, or it's going to throw an error. So either way, it's not going to give you what you're looking for. Does that make sense? Okay. Another thing to keep note of is that with whatever you're looking for, it must be in the first column. So if I were looking for a value that's not inside the first column, because I'm using the exact match, it's not going to allow me to find it at all. So is that clear? All right, so it's a very powerful function, but it does have some things to kind of keep in mind. Okay, let's shift gears now a little bit and talk about absolute versus relative references. So I'll first talk about a relative reference. So if I put in, say, E4, that is a cell that is going to be right here. It's going to be this value right here. So that is a relative reference, though, because if I were to copy a formula down, and we'll see some examples of this in a little bit, it's going to copy the thing down as well. So it's going to go to E5, E6, E7, and so on. Now, if we want to avoid that, we can use what's called an absolute reference. An absolute reference is going to be some value that is going to not change whenever you copy a formula down. So imagine if I had E4, and I always wanted to use this value no matter what. Okay, how do I do that? I use an absolute reference. Now, I should note that there are 2 major ways to do this. You can have an absolute reference of the row, you can have an absolute reference of the column, or both. And to do that, all you have to do is just type in, let's just say, equals E4. Okay, so right now, this is a relative reference. Now, if I wanted to have both the both the column and the row stay the same, all I do is I put a $sign before both of them. Does that make sense? Now, this is an absolute reference. If I copy the formula down, do whatever with it, it is not going to change. It will always be E4. Okay? Now, is that a pain to do? It kind of is, to be honest. So what you could do instead is you could just click on equals E4 and hit F4 on your keyboard. Okay? When you hit the F4 key on your keyboard, it goes ahead and it puts the $sign before the row and the column. If you hit it again, it's going to change them around. So it's kind of fun to play with, but not that much fun. It's Excel after all, am I right? So a relative reference is exactly that. It does not have any specification of the absolute of the row or the column. So it's just literally going to be E4 C10, D100, whatever you're using. Okay, does that make sense? So it's just literally going to look like, use C4 as an example. So it's just going to literally give us that value there. So in this case, C4 has weighted moving average. So whenever I put that in, that's what it's going to give us. Now, if I were to change C4 to something else, so if I just take off the E, for example, on average, you can tell it takes off the E once I hit enter. So it will go ahead and update based on whatever I have. Does that make sense? Okay, so now we have the mode, okay? Now, who can tell me what the mode is going to do for us? It's going to give us most occurring value. So, let's see, if I come right here, and let's see, it's not letting me type. I'm not sure why. I tell you what, I'll just save this, close out of it, and open it back. This isn't cooperating at all, now is it? I'll just close all these windows here. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so now for mode, we just type the equal sign, put in mode, and we give it the range we want to take the mode of. So what's going to be an interesting thing to get the mode of? I think the G column will be pretty interesting because there's a lot of repeating values in it. So when we do that, we can see there are the most occurring of 1. It's actually a tie between 1 and 2. So if we were to do the F column, we would see what the mode is of it. Okay, so that's going to give us 7 because there's 3 7s inside the F column. All right, and for median, it's going to do very similar, where it's going to give us whatever the middle value is. Just type in median, use whatever range we want to. In this case, let's use E. E is kind of interesting. So that gives us 6.5, which makes sense because there's 1 through 12, and, well, it's going to be an even amount, so it's going to have to take the average between the two middle values here. So 6 and 7 gives us 6.5. Okay, so now we're going to talk about stuff, let's see. Do you all taken stats yet? Has everyone taken stats? Anyone not taken stats? Okay, so I'll explain the difference between a population and a sample. Okay, so I'm not going to get political, but you've seen polls where they have some sort of a sample associated with it. Maybe it's 3,000 people they surveyed, and it's going to give you some sort of a confidence interval, usually 3% or so. So what they did is they used a sample. And if you're using sample data, you're going to use the sample standard deviation. We're not going to go into the difference of calculating it, but basically it just subtracts off a degree of freedom whenever you're calculating. That's all you're doing, okay? So population is going to assume that you have everyone in the population. So imagine if I could ask each and every person a question, okay, in the entire country or in the entire world. That's a population. So that's the difference there. For this class, I would say we're probably going to assume we have population data. So we're just going to use the standard deviation population. So it's just stdev.p instead of stdev.s. But they're going to give us very similar results when we start to have a large sample. It's just -1 on the degree of freedom calculation. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so let's take the standard deviation for population of the sample data. So we're just going to type in stdev.p, and now we're going to open that up, and we're just going to use the F column here. And that gives us the standard deviation, assuming it's for the population. Now, if we're going to assume it's for the sample, we're just going to take stdev.s, and we're going to do the same thing. Just grab the F column, close off the parentheses, and you can see it's going to be very similar, but we're dividing by a slightly smaller number. So that's the only difference there. Does that make sense? So that's going to give us a standard deviation. And we all know what standard deviation is, right? Okay. So conditional formatting is something we'll probably cover a little bit more detail next class. But I'll just kind of go over it right now. So what it allows you to do is to basically make cells a different format depending on if they meet a specified condition. So most of the time we're going to do things like highlighting or using different colors or something like that. And it's really useful in a spreadsheet because let's say you have 500 transactions. You want to see what are the top 10 transactions. Well, do you want to manually scroll through and look and see the top 10 transactions? Does that sound like a fun job? No. So instead, you'd use a highlight cell rule to do that. And you would just say maybe top 10, maybe greater than, whatever you want to do. You have lots of different options for these. So we're not going to cover them all right now, but that's what you would do. So you could also use top and bottom, so you can use top 10. Of course, you can also change this. You don't have to use 10. So you can use top 100. Maybe you have a much larger sample than 500, for example. So lots of different things you can do here. And of course, you're just going to make sure that you have the range selected that you want to apply that to. Does that make sense? So that's what we're going to talk about with conditional formatting. I think we're going to cover the different forecasting. I think we're going to save that for a later class as well. Stuff we'll talk about. I don't want to overwhelm you all with too much right now. So we're just going to cover that in a later class. So far, are there any questions about the functions or operators that we've covered? Okay. Let's go ahead and we'll do the conditional next class as well. Yeah. Uh-huh. So 2 is the column that we're going to get it in. So let's say, for example, we were using 3 columns. I'll show you that. So instead of using 8, we'll just select this a little bit differently. We'll still use 8, actually, because it doesn't repeat. So instead of using the F through the G, we're going to use the E through the G. And that's going to give us 3 columns in total. And we want to get the value that is in the, right now it's the second column. Okay, so you can see, we're looking for 8. And it's going to, right now, this is column 1. It's going to give us a value in the second column. But let's say we want to get the value in the third column. So we just change that to a 3. And what should that give us? So it gives us a 2, because we can see 8 is right here. Go over 1, 2, 3, and it's going to be 2. So that column is going to be the third thing. That's what telling it where the value is that you're wanting. The value that you're looking for is the first column. Does that make sense? Okay. Good question. Any other questions? All right. Let's go ahead and do some examples. You know, it's kind of, I'm not going to say I'm boring, but it's a lot more exciting to apply it to stuff. Does that make sense? So, got a basic grade calculator here. Got your labs are worth 30% of your grade. Your exams are worth 40% of your grade. Participation is 10%. And analytical report is 20%. Does this look familiar to anyone? Hopefully it looks familiar. Basically how your grades are calculated. Okay, so for labs, how many labs are there in total? There's 6 labs, right? So, someone throw me a lab grade. 100, another lab. Let's do another 100. Another one. 30, okay. Another. 32. Another. 77, and one more. 89. Okay. So, you know that your lab average is going to be the average of basically the top 5. Is that correct? So I'm going to drop the lowest. So there's a couple different ways we could do this. We know looking at this that 30 is the lowest. So what we could do, if we wanted to, is we can manually type in 100 plus 100 plus 32 plus 77 plus 89. And of course we know there's 5 in total, so we can just divide by 5. Okay, I forgot to put an equal sign in front of that. But if we put an equal sign, it's going to give us the average. And that's going to be the lab average. Do you think I'm going to manually do that for 100-something people or however many people I got? I'm a pretty lazy person. You know, I'm going to try to find an easier way to do things. So instead of doing that, what we can do is we can use a good friend, the sum function. We're going to take a sum of these right here. And now, what's the problem with this? What do I need to get rid of? If I'm dropping the lowest, what should I get rid of? So I want to subtract off the minimum value. Okay? So when we do that, got to make sure the parentheses match. It's going to give us the score. Now, there's a couple different things we could do now. We could go ahead and divide this by 5, and that's a perfectly okay way to do this for now. And that gives us the same thing as what we just got, 79.6. But let's say I want to be a little bit fancier, okay? This is where the count function would come in. So we take the count of these things right here. Whoops. Take these count right here. And we're going to subtract 1. So we'll make sure that the parentheses match on this. Make sure we have parentheses enclosing that entire count minus 1 statement. And what that's going to do is that's going to give us a count of 6 minus 1. Then that's going to be divided by. Does that make sense? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So let me go ahead and hit enter there, and then I'll... Whoops, that's a little bit too much. Okay, that covers everything. Is that better? Yeah, definitely, like I said, let me know if there's something like that. So does that make sense? So there's a couple different ways we could do it. So first, I took the sum, subtracted off the minimum value. That's all inside of the parenthetical statements there, because we want to make sure that's done before any division. Now, that's where the order of operations comes in handy, because as we know, what would happen normally inside of this if we did not use parentheses to change the order of operations? So it would take the minimum value and divide it by the count. That's the first thing it would do. Then it would take that and it would have it subtracted from the sum, and we would subtract 1 from it. Is that going to give us anywhere close to an average? No. So while the parentheses are very important for determining sort of the order of operations here. Okay. So next, we're going to look at the exam average, okay? I don't drop an exam, just throw me an exam grade. I heard 95, and then I heard 42. Okay? So, for exams, we can literally just use average. Nothing fancy here. 68.5. Participation grade should be 100, so we'll just put 100 in. Analytical report, someone throw me an analytical report grade. Any grade at all works. 68. Okay? So, we have our weights. The weights are basically whatever they're going to be multiplied by, and then we have the scores. So how do we calculate the weighted scores? Multiply the weight by the score. So a couple different ways we could do this. We could take B2 multiplied by C2, and that's going to give us that. Now here's what I'm talking about with absolute versus relative references. When you click on this column after you type in equals B2 times C2, you see this little, in the bottom right corner, how it's got a slightly larger box. Does everyone see that? So if I mouse over that, it gives me like a sort of a bold cross. What I want to do is I want to click that bold cross and drag down to where I want to go. And that's going to go ahead and copy that formula down. And as you can see, because I use relative references, it goes ahead and changes it accordingly. Because I dragged it down, it's not going to change the columns that it's in, but it's going to change the rows. So it's going to decrement each row to go down 1 as we go. Does that make sense? Okay, a couple of the ways I could do that instead of clicking and dragging. Sometimes that takes a lot of time. So what I could do instead is I could double click it. It's going to automatically go. I could also hold shift down and hit end and then the arrow down while I do it as well. So a lot of different ways we could do that. Okay, so now we have the weighted scores. We've taken the weights and multiplied them by the average for that category. What do I do with these now? How do I get your actual class grade? Starts with an S. Sum, that's exactly correct. Type in sum, and we're just going to select the range we're wanting to add. So we can do that a lot of different ways. And hit our good friend enter. 74.88. Now, we could use conditional logic to determine what grade that is. We'll get to that in a little bit here. Time allows. Let's see, we got till 9:55. Let's do that next class. Now, can anyone tell me another way that I could calculate your average? It'd be a little bit easier than doing that. I could do it inside of one cell. What am I going to put here? So it also starts with sum, but that's not the entirety of it. Anyone remember? So it's going to be the sum product. Okay? And here, all we're doing is we're typing in the B array followed by the C array. Okay? So it's literally click on the B and the C. You could also just type in B colon B, comma, C colon C. So we're going to hit enter there. And that gets us the exact same value. Isn't that cool? I think it's pretty cool. So next class we'll pick up with doing the monthly data. For now, are there any questions? Just kind of an intro to Excel day. Definitely make sure you understand each of these functions and operators that we covered. Make sure you understand the sort of order that they require things in, because you'll definitely need to know that for the exam. But once we use it some, I think it'll come naturally. So if there's no questions, you all are certainly free to go. Have a great day. I'll stick around here about 5 or 10 minutes if anyone has any questions. So have a good one, everyone. Oh, by the way, I canceled class on Labor Day because I'm not going to have anyone here on Labor Day. That's pretty lame, and I'm not lame, so no class on Labor Day.